Hey everyone, Alan here. This episode has an explicit label, but I just want to give an extra warning before we start, especially since this is about a movie called Kids. As a father, I'm telling you, this episode is definitely not for kids, especially mine. Adults only from here on out.
I know, but there's a difference between making love, having sex, and then fucking. Right. Making love is like, yo, you know what?
You know what it's like? It's like sweet.
It's real slow.
And sex, it's like, all right, let's have sex.
Let's go. Yeah.
A group of teenagers steal, have sex, and do drugs in New York City. This week, we discuss the difference between malt liquor and beer, an awkward conversation with your grandma, and a chivalrous offer of corn dogs. We also share our thoughts on Ready Player 2 before finding out if 1995's Kids stands the test of time.
It's the test of time. James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with the glutton. Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time. James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time. James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. My name is James Brief, and joining me, as always, is Alan Noah. Say hi, Alan.
Don't tell me what to do. Now I'm going to say hello because you told me to say hi, and I'm just that kind of a rebel. I'm a rebellious kid, like in the movie Kids that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it's basically how they rebel by saying, hello. I'm not going to say a, I'm going to say hello.
You probably won't get this reference, but there's a Weird Al song called Young, Dumb, and Ugly, where it's basically like, we keep our library books until they're overdue, and we wait until the very last minute to pay our telephone bills, and it's like, they think that they're rebels, but they're really not. It's funnier in the song. But before we get into Kids, let's talk about some kind of exciting news that there is going to be a Ready Player 2 novel, not necessarily a movie. There might be a movie eventually, but they have officially announced that Ready Player 2, the book, is coming out in November. I am really excited about this. My son and I recently read the book. You know, it was a reread for me, but his first time. And I knew that I loved the book, but reading it again, like I was so hooked, and my son was super, super into it. When we would read like one chapter before bed, he would just beg, can we please read another chapter, Dad? Please, please, please. So the thought of a sequel, I'm in. I'm all in for that. What do you think?
I really enjoyed the novel, and it was an enclosed story. I'm going to hope that Ernest Cline waited until he had a good story rather than a good offer. You know, he was offered a large sum of money to write a sequel, but I would hope that he did it service, because he could just do another version of the first one, and I get it, you know, but I think it'll lose some of the magic if it's just like, and here's some 90s pop culture references this time. I just hope there's something a little more interesting there. It's a world with virtual reality, so there's infinite places to go with it. Let's just hope it's something good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do not want a rehash of the first one where Halliday, who's the creator of the Oasis, like he hid something else that now Parzival needs to find. But I have faith that there's an interesting story there. The first book came out in 2011. He's had 9 years to come up with something. This isn't just like, you know, a cash grab where he just banged something out 2 weeks after the first one hit the bestseller list. After my son and I read the book, we watched the movie, and I went into it thinking like, ugh, I gotta watch this movie again. Oh, well, whatever. And I have to say, I enjoyed it a lot more the second time around. It still has flaws. I stand by like my big issues with it that I had when I saw it the first time around, but going into it with unbelievably low expectations made me enjoy it more because, you know, when I saw it the first time, my expectations were super high. And the fact that the movie is probably pretty meh in the grand scheme of things, depending on your expectations when you go in, it really colored my my experience. And I was like, yeah, okay, it's fine. What a great soundtrack. I was able to enjoy it more.
That's one of the last films I watched on HBO, probably the last few months that I had HBO for myself. Back in like Game of Thrones season 6 era, whenever that was, Ready Player One was on repeat all the time on that channel. And I agree. It's a film that did grow on me. And it's the kind of film that if you go on the internet, you can find out, here's 20 reasons why you actually hated the movie Ready Player One. I'll agree with a good amount of those, but when you don't go and the internet tells you why you have to hate all these things, that you can just kind of go in and be like, oh, okay, I actually like that for myself, and it was a good time.
Yeah. But let's get into this week's movie, which is Kids. And the reason I wanted to do Kids was because last week we did Clueless in honor of its 25th anniversary. And you know me, I'm a sucker for anniversaries. And I saw that apparently a week after Clueless came out in 1995, this movie, Kids, came out. And I thought to myself, well, I've never seen Kids. I'm aware of it. I had some big picture idea of what it was about. But I was like, well, that would be interesting to compare these two movies back to back and, see how these two very different movies approached what it's like to be a teenager in 1995. And I kind of regret that decision, to be honest, because I really didn't enjoy watching this movie for a multitude of reasons that we'll talk about. And I'm not going to say whether it stands the test of time now. We'll say that to the end, of course, but I think it's going to be pretty obvious as we talk about this movie that I really, really hated it. And it's a shame that I suggested it, because now I can't even blame you and be like, James, you made me watch this movie. It was my idea. So shame on me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, right from the opening scene, you realize why this film, which was given an NC-17 rating by the Motion Picture Association of America, but the distributors did not adopt it and they just released it as unrated. But this film, it depicts the lives of several teenagers over the course of a single summer day in 1995. Our main character, Telly, is a sex-obsessed boy who has made it his goal to sleep with as many virgin girls as he can. While he's out on the hunt for his latest sexual conquest, Telly and his friends shoplift, they drink, take drugs, even beat a man nearly to death. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a girl that Telly had previously slept with named Jenny, she finds out that she's HIV positive. And Jenny's only had sex with Telly, so she knows that she contracted it from him, so she searches the city to try to stop him from infecting anyone else. But will she make it in time to prevent anyone else from contracting the disease, or will she be too late?
Now, I don't need to ask you if this was a big hit when it was released, because I know that it was basically not really released widely because it was unrated, and these kinds of films usually don't see a wide release. I know I didn't see it in the theater. I think a few people I know had talked about seeing it. I wonder if more people talked about seeing it than had actually seen it, but I got to imagine that its box office take was pretty low overall.
Actually, the film writer, have you ever heard of this guy, Harmony Korine?
The only thing I know of that he did was Spring Breakers, that movie from, I don't know, maybe the early 2010s that he wrote and directed, but I don't know much else about him.
Right, that's the dreadlocked James Franco. He's like a drug dealer.
Yes, that movie, yeah.
Yeah, so he wrote this film, and it's directed by Larry Clark, produced by Gus Van Sant, and he's, of course, a very famous director. Best Picture, he made Good Will Hunting, and this film is made, it's made for $1 million. Harmony Korine, he had written it basically about his life and growing up in California, but it was originally going to be cast by all of his friends, and it just took a while, and they were in their early 20s by the time this became a film, so they recast everything. And So the film was ultimately made for $1 million. They scrounged that together, and it was sold to Miramax for $3.5 million. This and Clerks famously was sold to Miramax. Like, Miramax had a thing for going to film festivals and finding, brilliant films by acclaimed people and, then buying them cheap and then releasing them. So they bought it for $3.5 million, and it ultimately made in the box office $8 million.
There was some little tidbit of trivia I saw that both Weinstein brothers allegedly made $2 million each on this movie, like personally, not the Miramax company. I don't know if that's true. That seems like a little bit of a stretch if it was made for 1 and sold for 3.5 and its take was 8. But regardless, I could see why a guy like Harvey Weinstein would really like this movie. This seems like a movie that would be right up his alley. That is, in fact, meant as an insult, by the way, to all parties involved.
I was just looking at the box office returns. It was only in the theaters for like 6 weeks. And the first week, though, it made a lot of money on what they call the per screen average. And there was a lot of hype for this because, you had heard of this, right, Al?
Yeah. The way I heard about it was from my sister, Samantha, who's been on the show before, and we're going to have her back on again. But I remember she talked about it a lot, just as like, have you seen this movie, Kids? Have you heard about Kids? And I didn't really know what she was talking about other than it was like this big scandal and it was all about sex and it's a movie that you shouldn't see. That's really all I knew about it. What did you know about it back in 1995?
Oh, I saw it. I saw this in like 1996 at my friend's. It was my friend's neighbor who I was friendly with, and he was the guy that would see the indie films. And if you're going to shock somebody, you're really going to shock them with this opening scene. Because it's about 30 straight seconds, probably feels like 5 minutes, but it's 30 seconds of 2 teenagers. And these are not, your sitcom Beverly Hills 90210 teenagers that are really like 25. The kids in this film, for the most part, look like adolescents. And there are 2 kids and they're French kissing like for like 30 straight seconds.
Yeah. Sorry, no, they are not kissing. They are eating each other's faces. Like, it is horrible to watch. It's hard to say this about like, oh, just forget about the fact that they're kids, because you can't forget about the fact that they're kids, because these kids do look like kids. You can tell they're young, and it's like they've never kissed before. The way they're moving their mouths, it looks like they're trying to eat each other's face. It's really just awful and uncomfortable to watch. And you're right, however long it was of that scene, it felt much, much longer. And then it only gets worse when they stop kissing and they start talking, because the guy, Telly, is trying to convince this young girl that she should lose her virginity right there and then with him. And she's not really into it, but he just convinces her that he really cares about her. He really likes her. Then we see them have sex. There's some voiceover, which at this point, I'm like, I can't even complain about the voiceover. That's the least bothersome thing in this movie so far. And for me to say that, then he walks out of the bedroom. He spits over the banister, from the upstairs, and then just leaves and goes and meets up with his friend.
Yeah, and he's really only in it for deflowering virgins. And he really doesn't give a shit about this girl. She lives in this beautiful brownstone in the Upper East Side. And the fact that he spits is like, who gives a shit? Because he had just been saying this whole, I care about you and you're so special. And then he just goes outside and we meet his buddy Casper, who's just sitting on the stoop drinking a 40.
Yeah, there's a lot of Old English 40s in this movie, and just watching someone drink a 40 kind of makes me nauseous. It's not beer, it's malt liquor, and I don't know what the difference is.
It's more alcoholic.
Oh.
Yeah. It's like beer is like 4%, 3-4%, and malt liquor is like high single digits, I think.
Oh.
Something like that.
But it's also just disgusting. Like, it's worse than bad beer, you know, like a Natty Light or something. Like, I would rather drink a bad beer than a 40. I remember the last time I ever drank a 40, I was with not a friend, some kid I knew, and we drank 40s and ate awful, terrible Chinese takeout. And I was so sick after that. I have never drank another 40 or eaten Chinese from a place that I don't know ever again. And that was like 20 some odd years ago.
That's a good streak, Al. But I have to tell you that when I was 16 watching this, I was like, wow, this guy's making out with a girl. Oh my God, these guys are drinking in the daylight. It's the summer. It's not like they're like cutting school to do this. It's just kind of like, I had no idea really what I was looking at, because this definitely was not your typical kid at Clarkstown South High School. I am fascinated by the fact that there are kids my age doing this, and I was kind of at awe when I was watching this as a 16-year-old.
Another part of that is the fact that these kids do look like kids, you know, as opposed to in Clueless, which we talked about last week, where some of the teenagers look like teenagers, but a lot of them look older and they all look gorgeous and they're all Hollywood and glamorous. These people look like you and I and people that we knew when we were teenagers. But they definitely didn't act like anyone I was hanging out with. Not to say that there weren't teenagers like this in 1995. I'm sure they were. But yeah, definitely not in my circle. Telly's talking about how he only wants to have sex with virgins. It's the most important thing in the world to him. He says they'll never forget it. He's like, they'll tell their grandkids about who they lost their virginity to, which I was like, I don't know what kind of fucked up conversations this guy's having with his grandma. But Casper at one point stops to like take a piss on a building, and they go and they steal a 40 because they like 40s and they want to drink 40s, but they don't have any money. So what else are they going to do? They steal. Then they get to their buddy's house and they do whippets, which I think was pretty shocking at the time. I mean, I guess it would still be now, but I've got to imagine in 1995, that was like even more of like a, whoa, they're showing that kind of moment.
You saw there's like 20 cartridges on the floor. I mean, these kids are doing so many whippets, and this is just an apartment full of kids just doing all sorts of drugs. You're not exactly sure what they're doing, but to this movie's credit, something you're going to see throughout the film is that they have a very racially diverse group of friends, and all these kids, they're just talking about the thing that honestly is probably on 15-year-olds' minds. They're all talking about sex, and the thing I found fascinating by it is that I think a lot of them are talking about sex as if like they're super experienced in sex. And I really got the feeling that a lot of these kids don't really know what the hell they're talking about. And a couple of them are virgins, and they're kind of just like mouthing along and going, yeah, that's what I think too.
Yes, I think that's probably true. But, you know, still some of the stuff that they're saying is really disturbing. One thing that they're saying that really stuck out is when they're saying that condoms are terrible and this whole AIDS thing is a lie. It's not real because I don't know anyone who has it. Do you know anyone who has it? And we talked about this ad nauseum in our Jaws episode, but that really stands out in this coronavirus pandemic where the cases are spiking of COVID among young people because they're hanging out with each other because they think they can't get it and they think they're immune. And young people tend to do that. They think they're invincible. And I don't know anyone who has it. Do you know anyone who has it? No, it must be a made up lie. You know, now they say that about COVID, then they said it about HIV and AIDS, but it's really just freaky and scary.
Yeah, and there's a really great scene here when you see all these boys talking about what they talk about, and then it's cut to an identical scene with a bunch of similarly aged young girls, 15, 16 years old, hanging out in their own apartment. They're talking about all their sex experiences, about having sex when you're on your period or when it's your first time. Some of the women are like, oh, there's such a big difference between making love and having sex and fucking. and they're having lots of laughs, and that's all they want to talk about. And I think to an extent, this is probably realistic on like a summer day if there's zero parents around. And I think this is what hormonal teenagers talk about at whatever level their social group is doing.
Right. And the girls are clearly more responsible than their male counterparts, because while the boys are bragging about how they don't use condoms and condoms are stupid, the girls are admitting that, yeah, they don't always use them, but two of them went to the clinic. This girl, Ruby, who's played by a very young Rosario Dawson, she's had sex with a lot of different guys and she wanted to get tested, and her friend Jenny went with her. And Jenny is a baby-faced Chloe Sevigny. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Maybe, maybe not. My apologies, Chloe, if I said your name wrong. I don't even know how to begin with the umlauts. I don't know how to pronounce that. So I'm just going with regular old Chloe. But Jenny had only had sex with one person, and that's Telly. And she goes along with Ruby to the clinic. And even though we hear that Ruby has had sex with many guys, often unprotected, vaginal sex, anal sex, she is clear. She is clean. But Jenny, who only had sex one time with Telly, she's HIV positive. And you got to remember, this is 25 years ago. In 1995, being HIV positive was effectively a death sentence.
Yeah, I don't think it really works out well for this young woman.
No, it is certainly implied that she is going to die. And she knows it.
Yeah, it's a powerful scene. But there's one small scene after this when the kids are in the subway, and there's a part where Telly and Casper are sitting in the subway car, and a man comes by, and this is a very common thing in New York City subways, a panhandler, a guy who's coming through begging for money. And this is probably, I think, the only single act from at least any male character in this film that is any positive thing that is done. Casper winds up giving this homeless guy, this beggar, some money. And you know these guys don't have any money. So even the fact that he's giving him some coins, I thought, for the most part, it might be the only redeeming part of this character in the arc of this film.
Well, I mean, it certainly is the only thing he does in the movie that is even remotely positive. He's a pretty despicable character, as pretty much everyone is, except for Jenny and I guess Ruby.
I think it's a pretty good characterization of what happens next is when they go to Telly's house, because he steals from his mother in this next scene. The mother that obviously has no money, is taking care of a baby. It's a good way of setting this character as a real scumbag. Because, he could be a sleazeball versus a scumbag.
What's the difference between a sleazeball and a scumbag?
Oh, we're definitely going to find out as this film goes, because Telly goes from bad to worse, definitely.
I guess. I mean, I think sleazeball and scumbag, I think you could use any negative word and it wouldn't be strong enough for Telly and Casper. There is one random line that I'm only going to mention from this scene just because of test of time, but I think Telly is saying that Casper has hairy armpits, and he says that it looks like you have buckwheat in a headlock. Buckwheat is from the Little Rascals, and he was a little kid that had an afro. So I get that reference. I don't think I ever watched the Little Rascals, but I heard of it from my parents, I think. That's certainly not a reference that has aged well.
No, to us, it was an old reference as well.
Yeah.
And, I want to ask you a question here. This is a scene I first had a thought. I think that Casper might be a virgin.
Maybe.
You never see him hang out with any girls. In fact, you see him trying to flirt with girls and girls are not interested in him. We see in this scene that Telly offers him some deodorant because he's like, dude, you stink. And Casper's like, no, I don't want any deodorant. And there's a couple clues that I think he's a virgin. And I certainly think that he envies Telly enormously because of Telly's, sexual conquests.
Maybe. I don't know. And to be honest, I don't care. But I do think that it's a valid point that you're bringing up, certainly. From Telly's house, they go to the park and they go to get weed. And this whole scene is up there in terms of just how awful and uncomfortable it is. First, Telly buys some weed from a drug dealer and then sees another kid that he knows. And it becomes this how to make a blunt 101 scene where they show the audience and describe as they're doing it how you take weed and a cigar and make a blunt. And this scene really made me stop and think about this movie in general. And this question of who is this movie for? Is this movie to shock adults? Is this movie to shock kids? Is this movie like a how-to guide for how to be a bad kid? It kind of seems like it's a how-to guide for kids because it's literally doing a how-to do drugs moment here. Like, why does this need to be in the movie?
You're such a father. It's kids doing drugs in the summer. They're smoking weed. Why are you so upset about that? How do you think they're going to smoke weed? They're going to bring their huge glass bong to Washington Square Park?
No, that has jack shit to do with me being a father.
Oh, you just don't like that they left in the scene of rolling the blunt.
Yeah, I just don't think it's necessary to give kids the instructions in that scene. He could buy the weed and then you could see them smoking the blunt. But the fact that they do an instruction manual of this is how you make the blunt. First, you start with the cigar. Then you scrape it. I mean, like they go through the entire step-by-step process. That is unnecessary. And it kind of sort of makes me think that the whole movie is an instruction manual for kids. It has jack shit to do with me being a father. I would have said the exact same thing in 1995.
Okay.
If I sound lame, then fine, whatever. But then they make fun of a gay couple that's walking by. Then, if that wasn't bad enough, Casper is skateboarding and he knocks into some guy who's walking by. It's Casper's fault. The guy says like, hey, watch where you're going. And because of that, Casper and Telly and this whole group of guys pounce on him and just beat him like nearly to death. One kid hits him over the head with a skateboard. It's like, what the fuck? I mean, it is just brutal and terrible on every level.
Oh, yeah, that guy probably has some kind of brain damage. And going in my like little backstory of Casper in my mind, I don't think Casper was going to fight that guy. Casper was just doing a lot of what's up, huh? What's up? And he was talking a lot of shit, but I didn't think he was going to do anything. It was a different guy in the group that sucker punches the guy from the back, in the back of the head.
It's not even a sucker punch. It's with the skateboard.
Right. He knocks him in the back of the head with a skateboard. By the end, Casper has the adrenaline of the crowd, and Casper gives the final blow by swinging a skateboard in the guy's face. And later, one guy asks in passing, hey, do you think maybe we killed that guy? And they're like, nah, he was twitching and shit.
The kid who says, do you think we killed that guy? And seems to be like, you know, maybe thinking about it a little bit and maybe showing an inch of remorse. That character's name is Harold. He's the one who first hits him over the head with the skateboard.
Right.
So if he feels guilty about it, he fucking well should, because he instigated the physical violence in the first place. So it definitely rings hollow that he doesn't really feel bad. He doesn't do anything about it. He just talks about it once and then that's it.
Right. And, you know, meanwhile, as this is all going on, there's a whole other story on the other side of the city because Jenny, she knows she's HIV positive, but she decides she has to find Telly. And this being 1995, no one really knows where he is. So basically, she's on a mission to find Telly so she can tell him he's HIV positive.
Right. And Telly is on a mission of his own because the one virgin that he had sex with earlier that day isn't enough for him. He wants to have sex with two virgins in a single day. And he decides that he is going to sleep with this girl, Darcy, who's the younger sister of a friend of his. So he picks up Darcy just by going to her house and inviting her to go swimming with Casper and Harold and a couple of their other friends. And they go to a pool and they all jump in and they're talking about sex with these girls. They're trying to get these two girls to kiss. They do kiss. And then Harold is being really aggressive with one of those girls. And meanwhile, Telly is just putting his quote unquote moves on Darcy, who I don't know if they ever say how old she is, but she looks like she's, I don't know, 13, 14, somewhere around there. Very young.
Yeah, and there's even a disturbing scene when he's talking about the first girl that he first had sex with. He said, she was showing me some pictures of her from like 6 months earlier, and he's implying she basically had not gone through puberty like 6 months earlier. And he says outright, I'm turned on by this, that she just became pubescent. And I think he wants to have sex with any young woman that is willing to have sex, pretty much.
No, not young woman. Girl.
Yeah, girl.
Girl. I'm not being a dick about like semantics. I mean, I think it's important to note the distinction that these are not young women. These are children. I mean, the name of the movie is Kids. And it is important that that is who you're watching throughout this movie. I think that's the reason that they named the movie Kids. So while Jenny is searching for Telly, Telly was supposed to go to this club, NASA. And at first I wasn't sure if they were saying that they were going to go to Nassau, like on Long Island. But no, they mean this club, NASA. I think I've mentioned this before in some other episode. I don't remember what, but I think I went to one of those clubs in the 90s, maybe two, but definitely wasn't my scene. But from what I know from friends who went, there were tons of high schoolers in these clubs and they would do drugs and have sex and it was totally unsupervised. And that's what you see as Jenny goes to this club looking for Telly. Did you ever go to clubs like that?
One time I did, yeah, and I definitely saw people having sex in the corners and stuff, and I was a virgin at the time and definitely thinking, whoa, oh my God, this is insane.
Wait, you mean you're not a virgin now?
No, I'm not, Al.
Way to go.
Yeah, thank you.
Jenny, while she's at this club, she meets some doofy guy who offers her drugs and she's like, no, I don't want to take it. I just want to find Telly. And he's like, no, take it. He literally shoves the pill in her mouth and is like, don't worry, it'll be great. It is not great for what happens later to Jenny.
I love how you say some doofy guy, because like I said earlier, this group of kids, there's a very diverse cast of characters. And the second I saw this kid, I immediately said, oh, there's the Jewish kid. And to be fair, the character's name is Benny, and it is played by actor Scott Schwartz. So I was correct. He is her Jewish friend. And oh, by the way, if people don't know, we are Jewish. So, comedy rules of politically correctness. We're allowed to say this. So yes, when you said the doofy looking guy, he had the backpack and he's like, hey, let me hook you up, Jenny. Even though she's like, dude, I just want to find Telly. And he's like, no, this will make you happy.
Right. It does not. And making matters worse, Telly isn't at the club because they changed plans. And instead of going to this club, they went to some house party. And once again, you have another horrible, terrible scene where you have kids that look even younger than our main set of characters in this movie at this party. And one of them you saw in the earlier scene where Casper was doing whippets and there was a kid who looked really young, I would say 10 or 11, and he was smoking weed in that scene. Here in this scene, it's him and these other kids who all look like they're 11 and they're talking about sex and maybe they're probably virgins because they're only 11. And then Telly and Casper are kind of making fun of them for being virgins. It's like, dude, you don't make fun of an 11-year-old for being a virgin. Like, what the fuck? And then later on, there's this scene with these four kids and they're on the couch and they're like passing drugs back and forth, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1, like up and down the line. And it's really disturbing, not just to watch, but you see a scene like that and you gotta think about how they filmed it. Like sometimes you'll see like a blockbuster movie and there's an adorable little kid and she says, shit. And you think her parents probably told her you don't say that word and it's fine and she'll hear it in another couple of years anyway, so whatever. But this is like, how the fuck did some parents agree to let their kids do simulated drugs on camera for like a really long time and talk about how cool it is and how much they love this weed and how they wish they could get this fucked up all the time? I mean, I found it really just uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, my guess is that this was just a party that they just kind of filmed, and they just filmed kids hanging out. And I think the kids started making out with each other, and all these kids, these characters are all pairing off. And there's this one kid that's trying so hard to make out with this one girl, and he's like, Gertie, I love you. I want to buy you dinner. I want to buy you corn dogs. And she's like, no. That made me laugh. When he said, I want to buy you corn dogs.
I mean, I guess that's all he could afford. I don't know. I mean, he's desperate. You know, as fucked up as it is, the offer to buy her corn dogs is the most chivalrous thing you see in this movie. So, you know, hats off to that guy. He's a way better person than like 99% of the other characters in this movie.
Right, because speaking of chivalrous, or not chivalrous, rather, Telly arrives because he has now brought this young Darcy, and he's convinced her to come to the party. And by the time they get there, this is the part of the party where, the music is dying down, and you have to carefully walk in this apartment to not step on kids that are not passed out from who knows what kinds of substances. And he walks Darcy over to some kid, and to, I guess, Telly's credit, he walks over to the boy whose apartment this is, and he goes, yo, let me use your parents' room. The kid's making out with someone, so he interrupts kissing this girl for a second to go, all right, fine, but don't fuck anything up. And then Telly takes Darcy to the bedroom. And then he does basically the same exact shtick he does in the first scene, where he just talks the girl through, like how much he likes her. And this follows a scene we had seen right before on the street, telling Darcy how much he likes her and how much he cares about her. And she says she likes him. And basically, at the same time, you see Jenny getting closer and closer to the party, but she's also getting very slow because of whatever drug that guy Benny gave her. And Telly takes Darcy to the bedroom, and he's getting her clothes off, and Jenny shows up, and she goes to the bathroom where a totally drunk off his ass Casper sees her, tells her that Telly is in the dude's parents' bedroom, and she opens the door, and you see the point of view that they're already having sex, and she's too late. And also, I mean, this girl, if it's a video game, she's on like 1% health. Like, she has zero energy, and she basically takes one more step to the couch and just passes out cold.
Right. And her journey through the city has been a failure. It was all for nothing. And just when you think it can't get any worse, it does, because Casper wakes up, presumably in the middle of the night or the early morning, and, stumbles around the house, finding any 40s that have a tiny little bit of malt liquor left, guzzling it down, and finds Jenny on the couch, and he rapes her. You hear her saying, don't, and it's hard for her to speak, and she's barely conscious. And, with all the horrible things that have happened in this movie, I have to say that as I was watching it, I was like, okay, there's going to be a rape, right? Like, a rape is coming. And you could argue that the very first scene with Telly and that underage girl is a rape, and I think you would have a very strong argument. But I felt like it was only a matter of time before you saw someone get assaulted, and it happens here to Jenny.
Oh, well, we didn't mention that Darcy in the scenes earlier. You can clearly hear her saying no or stop. It hurts.
You're right. That's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, Telly rapes Darcy, and then Casper rapes Jenny. The very clear implication being that Telly had HIV, he gave it to Jenny, and presumably Jenny gave it to Casper. And then there's this like weird montage of just people walking around New York City for, I don't know, 30, 60 seconds, something like that. Then it goes back to the party and Casper just kind of says, Jesus Christ, what happened?
He doesn't even remember what happened.
Is that it? That he doesn't remember, or that he feels guilty about it? Maybe.
I think he's completely on so much that he doesn't remember that. That's my opinion. The way he was basically babbling to himself in the bathtub and drinking nothing but malt liquor, and he's a 15-year-old. I think he does not remember anything that happened. That's my opinion. But when people are drunk, it doesn't excuse the things they do. They just have lower inhibitions of things they might have otherwise done. The things he did when he was drunk or on whatever drugs he did, that was Casper. So, Al, 1995's Kids, you picked this film. Obviously, you were shocked by the film, but does this film stand the test of time?
I really can't say anything positive about this movie at all. First off, it's a shitty movie. There's no plot. There's no character development. It's not interesting. I don't think it has any kind of meaning or message or purpose. Doing my research today, I saw that some critic said that it bordered on child pornography, which I happen to agree with. Like watching these little kids have sex and, do drugs. Yeah, I know it's a movie and it's not real, but even still, how is this filmed? I mean, like, I kept thinking about that. How the fuck was this filmed? Who allowed this to be filmed? I realize that Harvey Weinstein came into it after the movie was already shot, but having his name associated with it, you're like, oh yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. We have watched over 200 movies for this podcast, and I've hated a lot of them, but I have never hated a movie as much as I hated this. I suggested it as like a pairing with Clueless. God, I loved Clueless. I was like grinning ear to ear the whole time I was watching Clueless. I was like, this is a fun movie. I like this. Watching this movie was the complete polar opposite. I was like, I hate this. I hate it. And the one word I kept thinking about in terms of this movie is that it is irresponsible. Why the fuck would you make a movie like this? Yeah, it's real, cool, neat. That doesn't mean you need to show it in a movie and tell kids how to do it and glamorize it. You can say, oh, well, Telly's kind of like an anti-hero. No, bullshit. He is the hero of this movie. He suffers no consequences in this movie. Yes, it's implied that there will be consequences for his actions later. He has HIV and you assume he will die. But it doesn't happen in this movie. If you're a kid watching this, you're thinking, man, this guy's cool. And, oh, I guess, yeah, he has HIV. But that is barely addressed. You feel for Jenny, but she is not the main character. This is not her story. And I find everything about this movie reprehensible. I guess you could make the counterpoint that, well, hey, kids are still irresponsible and kids still do think they're invincible and kids do still do bad things. So all of that does stand the test of time. Okay, I guess, but this is just absolute pure garbage. Also, having nothing to do with the fact that I hate this stupid movie, it doesn't stand the test of time because of cell phones. If Jenny had a phone, it would have been easier for her to track down Telly. Okay, fine, you could say, well, he would just ignore her calls or ignore her texts, which is true, but once she finds out that he's going after Darcy, she could just DM Darcy and say, hey, Telly has HIV, don't sleep with him. The end. So I'm going to say that it doesn't stand the test of time. There's no way I can say anything positive about this movie. I hated every second of it. What do you think, James?
So, what'd you really think of it? You want to show it to your son and daughter, Al? I didn't really get the feeling.
Oh, no, I think I told you what I really think.
Well, first thing I want to say is the locations of this film I thought were really interesting because this thing takes place in the Upper East Side of Manhattan, Washington Square Park. I'm not sure what it was like in 1995, but I did look up an article about all the locations it was filmed, and everything is filmed on like 79th Street and 2nd Avenue and Alphabet City. Today, these are very affluent locations all across Manhattan. So all these places would be very wealthy kids if they lived in the places. Like the Delinquent House was on West 42nd Street, which traditionally was like a real shithole, but now there's all those like, West 42nd Street apartments and, you're paying $3,000 a month for a studio.
Yeah, it's Hell's Kitchen.
I thought that was interesting. This summer, I have a very interesting job. The first half of the week, I work in New York City. I take care of foster care kids. We've been through a lot of stuff. And then the second half of the week, I take care of suburban kids. But I'll say, whether you're in this affluent area that I treat or these kids that are, for the most part, not in affluent situations, kids have sex. Kids do drugs. Kids are violent. Adolescents are uncontrollable. Adolescents are stupid. Adolescents get a lot of STDs. And I'll tell you, the STDs happen to the honors kids. They happen to the kids that are definitely not graduating high school. They happen to all these kids. They make stupid decisions. I see the aftermath of a lot of these things. And this is shocking. This film is not meant for children. I saw this at 16, and definitely by the end, you definitely see what a piece of shit that Telly is, and you go, okay, this is not cool. I think I agree with you about irresponsible. It would be irresponsible to show this to a child because you can get the wrong impression by this. But the film, what it's depicting, I do think stands up. I think that kids do this stuff. The film shock value in seeing kids making out. I mean, this stuff is really uncomfortable. And this is not a pleasant film. I saw it once in my life, and I never want to see this film again. But if you want a film about, what are the bad things that kids do? There's no parents in this film at all. Maybe one scene with Telly's mom that they steal from. And these characters, for the most part, almost every male character you see certainly has no redeeming value. Unfortunately, I'm going to take a different point of view while agreeing with pretty much everything you say, but just saying that the film stands up as, unfortunately, if you think that the stuff in this film is not happening, I mean, this stuff is happening. This is one of the hardest films I've ever had to see, and I don't ever want to see it again, but the content stands up. Pieces of shit delinquents, they exist, and they're predators out there. So I'm going to say it holds up as a terrible film. So there's a million disclaimers with this, but I think the film and its content holds up. So I'm going to say, yes, this film stands the test of time.
Here's my question for you. You said that this movie isn't for kids and it would be irresponsible to show it to kids. So who is the movie for?
That's a very good question.
Well,
that I don't know. I guess to see what it is that kids are doing. Is this for telling kids the bad consequences of making bad decisions about sex and drugs? Or I don't know. That's a very good question. But I don't know if a movie has to have a social message or if a film has to be made for a specific audience.
I disagree with you. I think a movie does need to have an audience that it's speaking to. And if you're going to make the argument that it's like a wake-up call for the adults of America, this is what kids are really doing. Okay, if you want to make that argument, you could, I guess, but the fact that they have that how to make a blunt tutorial in the middle of the movie completely destroys that argument. Okay, so what? They're getting high. I get it. It's not that big of a deal. But it's the framing of that scene that makes it seem like the whole movie is a how-to for kids. Seconds after you see that, they make fun of a gay couple. Then they beat a guy nearly to death. So it's very easy to think that they're telling you, as you watch that, hey, this is also fun stuff that you should do, and here's how you do it. You can then extrapolate it to the whole rest of the movie, that it's a how-to of doing whippets and forcing pills down people's throats and raping girls. I mean, the movie is just filled with bad lessons, and it really, really seems like it's made for kids. The fact that you saw it when you were 16, the fact that my sister saw it when she was, 14, 15, it kind of proves my point. That's who this movie is for. That's why it was irresponsible. And that's why I hate it. But I am very glad to be done talking about this movie, and I hope to never think about this movie ever again in my entire life. Next week, we're going to be talking about a, I guess, happier movie, or at least like a sillier, goofier movie that doesn't have these terrible themes from what I remember. 2000's Coyote Ugly. Have you ever seen this one, James?
Yeah, I think I saw it when it came out. It's been a while, but I believe it starred Piper Perabo, I think is how to say her name.
Sure.
Pipper? I don't know.
Well, I think Piper is right. I'm not sure about the last name, but let's watch something to cleanse the palate after this dog shit experience of talking about kids. In the meantime, talk to us at Test of Time Pod. We want to know your thoughts on kids and irresponsible movies and malt liquor or anything. We love hearing from you. Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.